Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Art of Herbal Healing podcast, where we talk about all things herbs and wellness. We like to say that wellness is goodness. And so I am so excited to have on this podcast our amazing guest, none other than Mr. Sam Coffman. He's an author. He is a certified herbalist, been doing this for several years, a renowned teacher. He's the owner of a herbalist school and the founder of the school. He also owns his own store and herbal clinic. Very excited to be here to chat with you, Mr. Coffman. Thank you and very welcome, a very warm welcome to the Art of Herbal Healing podcast.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be back.
Yes. Mr. Coffman, I know we've had a session with you before, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our audience and just, let us know, how you got into this journey of herbalism.
Sure. Yeah, I started into it through the world of military medicine as a U.S. Special Forces medic, an 18 Delta or Green Beret medic, as sometimes it would be called. And that was a really strong introduction into the world of austere medicine, field medicine, trauma, obviously battlefield trauma, but also remote care. So working with somebody over a prolonged period of time, prolonged field care, and being the decision maker, even where you might have a medical director, an MD or a DO that was thousands of miles away. So I've always had a real deep interest in austere medicine or medicine in the field. I grew up in a very plant literate family, and remember, my mother teaching me to talk to plants when I was 4 or 5 years old. We did gardening, gardened all our own food, pretty much, canned everything for the winter and so forth. So it wasn't a big jump for me ever to move into the world of medicine, working with plants. And that is a live medicine. That's a connection to the earth, which has always been a part of what I do as well. But coming from a very grounded kind of perspective of everything from trauma to chronic to acute care in a whether it's remote or whether it's in a clinic in the middle of the city, whether it's post-disaster, understanding that, it's good to understand the full spectrum of medicine, all the way from Western allopathic medicine to even, minor surgery, all the way to what I also have a master's degree in acupuncture and Oriental medicine, and I'm working on getting my New Mexico license to practice as a doctor of Oriental medicine. So whether it's traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, whether it's, anything from traditional Greek medicine that's been left over here in the U.S., whether it's Western kind of herbalism, medical herbalism, which is, sometimes has its place in there as well. Whether it's, of course, anything that's, related to energetic medicine. I could include Ayurvedic medicine. There's so many different areas and paradigms and ways to look at the body. And so for me, it's really been a journey of trying to integrate these areas into kind of a model that works really well for me. And I have, of course, evolved and changed that model over the last 30 years. And I find that as I add each layer to it, I become better and better as a clinician. I become better as a teacher. I have more to teach. And so I set up this school about 15 years ago. Well, the original school I set up 30 years ago, but really the version of the school everybody sees now, I set up 15 years ago and almost 16 now years ago. And it's called Herbal Medics Academy. It's also called the Human Path. That was the original name, but we keep both names. And we have a huge spectrum of information and curriculum that we've developed. I've myself have probably put in over 800 or 900 hours towards what we have as curriculum in these 4 different programs. So working as a clinical herbalist, working as just a teacher, whether it's in the field, whether it's in a classroom, working as a kind of mentor, an educator, coming up with the curriculum, being able to work with interns, being able to create environments where people get a wide diversity of what they're learning, not just seeing the same thing over and over again, but really something that focuses on a wide diversity of issues across different communities, different classes, so people who are very poor and live in an environment where, they're their food, quote unquote, that they're getting is basically glorified convenience store. Their grocery stores are it's very, very poor nutrition, all the way up to people who shop only at, the most expensive aisles in Whole Foods or whatever, anywhere in between there. Getting the diversity and understanding epidemiology as a culturally kind of specific thing that can happen, and being able to work not just with, of course, herbs, but also nutrition and education to be able to help people at the level that they're at financially, and work with being able to help them become more healthy. Excuse me.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. That's a great journey. So excited to hear. I'd love to dig into a little bit more about. You've touched on several areas. I would love to, perhaps first of all start with a question, which is, to you, what does herbal first aid mean? Is this something that we should be taught and learned by everyone? And how do you typically define this? How do you apply it when people refer to, herbal first aid? What comes to mind for you?
And I, I think it's really important to remember that out of the phrase herbal first aid, two of those three words are first aid, right? So I think you have to have an understanding of first aid before you can start talking about herbs. So, if something is going on, the way that I approach it, we have a whole first aid spectrum here. That starts from wilderness first aid certification to advanced wilderness first aid certification to wilderness first responder for certification. That's just kind of the first aid, the way that most people think of first aid when they think of wilderness first aid and first aid, right? But then from there, moving into what we call our austere program, what would you do? So all of the first aid that you learn, whether it's herbal or otherwise, is basically working with usually, either trauma or acute care type situations, and making a determination whether or not this situation needs higher care. And if it does need higher care, how can you get a person to higher care in a wilderness situation, for instance, as stable as you possibly can. So in other words, you're taking care of them if a person has an open fracture, let's say the lower leg. How can you get them to higher care without exacerbating that injury whatsoever, and keeping them stable and taking care of all the informational stuff that needs to be passed off and so forth. So there's a whole realm of kind of understanding any kind of first aid within the spectrum of higher care, red flags, and what we need to do to be able to make sure that we are an advocate for whatever that patient is, whether it's our child at home who stubbed their toe, or whether we're on a backpacking trip and somebody has high altitude, cerebral edema, so anything that's on a spectrum of being minor all the way to being life threatening, we have to be able to make those determinations. That's the first aid part. And we have to be able to work with basic bandaging and splinting techniques and understand that basic stuff. And I always say our wilderness first aid classes are sticks and rags courses. I want you to be able to do this with sticks and rags, because if you can do that, you can definitely work with any of the prepackaged compression bandages or anything else that's out there. That's going to be easy, but understanding the principles behind it, that's what you need to understand first. Okay, so then the herbal part comes in. Well, herbal medicine used in a first aid sense is the original, human species medicine. I mean, that's what we've been using as long as we've been a species on this planet. So it's very important to understand that and to know that it's very effective. It can be incredibly effective as long as you keep it within the, kind of the guidelines that I just talked about. And you're not, running out there, you have no understanding of first aid. You have no understanding of how the vascular system works and how to stop a bleed with just basic good bandaging. And you start, grabbing up handfuls of filthy plantain off the ground that's got, cow manure on it and sticking it on a wound. You obviously are not going to be doing anybody any good there, right? So you have to have a basic understanding of some of those concepts first before you start working with herbs. But at the point that you have that, the amount of incredible, of what I want to say, of a boost or an incredible tool that you have by working with herbs is astounding, right? I mean, we have herbs that are far more effective at working with a lot of different viral infections than anything pharmaceutical out there. I mean, I would put up Depending on what it is, I have formulas I would put up against any pharmaceutical for several different viral infections any day of the week. There are many things that we can do to help promote, proliferation of tissue, to be able to help promote the inflammatory process to move past inflammation and into that. There are many herbs we can even use for at least minor pain relief, and there are some we can use for major pain relief. But the problem is we start to get into, toxicity issues there, and really you have to be more advanced to understand that. So there's a lot of different things we can work with herbs that are on an acute level and even on a minor trauma level that are incredibly proficient at allowing everybody, in their backyard, in their kitchen, or whatever, to be able to work with these ailments. But again, within the perspective of red flags, understanding what those are and how to be safe and how to be, sane from a Western medical perspective too.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. So just to go back to what you talked about in terms of herbal first aid, um, and really trying to figure out how to use herbs in this first aid situation. So if it's an emergency situation like you had described, how do you find the herbs to apply, right? How do you, are you assuming that you have it, you're traveling with it, or you have it accessible, or you can go in and you're able to identify various herbs and apply it in that particular situation?
Exactly. Yeah. That's the $10,000 question, right? That's the one. Yeah, and that's it. That's what I've been working on for many years, for decades. We have an outreach organization called Herbal Medics, and we first started doing a lot of our free herbal clinics through Herbal Medics in Nicaragua, on the West Coast, and then on the East Coast, and with the Rami Indians in the middle of the jungle on the East Coast, and then Mexico. And then we started working a lot more in the U.S. and realized it was more effective to work in the U.S. because of the budget issues and being able to provide follow-up care. Basically, we just didn't have the bandwidth to be able to provide follow-up care outside of the U.S. So we're really more local now to communities in need. In that process, of course, working both with the health and welfare of the team of students that are doing that, and it's sometimes up to 25 students, and we're camping, or we're working as a group. It's everything as a group, right? We understand how to plan our own meals as a group. We understand how to take care and purify our own water as a group. Everything that we do without putting any strain on the local community. It's just us taking care of ourselves as a team, and then also taking care and providing free community herbal clinics, among other things. In that process, of course, I had to really start to develop formulas and a formulary that was very helpful both for the team and for our clinics, to be able to help save time and space. I had to come up with different ways of packaging herbs to be able to save time and space as well. So we probably are the only ones out there that I know of in the world that provide herbal first aid kits that cover these kinds of spectrums, that give different ways of bottling and using Nalgene bottles instead of glass, of being able to work with formularies that cover, urinary tract, the respiratory tract, the gut, even something that you might need to use, of course, for the surface of the body, for the skin or the eyes, the conjunctiva, minor trauma, those kinds of things. Whole range of formulas and a whole range of different application methods, not just taking a pill, right? I mean, there's so many different ways to extract herbs and to get them more available, whether it's sublingual, whether it's oral, whether it's nebulized, and you can do that now. You can carry handheld rechargeable nebulizers, whether it's nasal atomizers, whether it's eye washes, whether it's ear, tinctures, whether it's topicals, poultices, and plasters, all of these things. And then, of course, the gut as well, getting it to the gut, getting it maybe to the urinary tract. All of these things are very important in the field, especially to be able to work efficiently. And I have a whole new method of medicine making that I'm working on right now that will even cut down the weight more. And I've been messing around with it for several years now, and we're just about ready to maybe make some products out of it. It would be good for backpackers. It would be good for like the herbal first aid stuff that we do in the field with our herbal medics and so forth. So there's a lot involved in that. And I think, to answer hopefully the question completely, while you can absolutely, of course, use the local herbs wherever you go, and that would be ideal to know all the herbs in an area, and because you're going to get different species maybe of the same genus. Sometimes they work differently, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it takes local expertise to be able to know that, and you might not have that. You might not even be able to identify a lot of the plants. You may not have them available, a lot of the ones you're used to. So what I like to do is, that's the ideal, but that's not really very useful in a clinic situation where you need to have a dosage of, a dosageable, if that's a word, amount of an herb or a formula that you can work with immediately. You don't have time to sit and make medicine even for a preparation tincture. It's still going to be hours, let alone days or weeks. So you really have to go into those things, I think, already prepared ahead of time with what herbs you're going to use. Now, the question comes down to formulas versus simples, and that's another big question. Like, so we'll take along, like the first time we did this in Nicaragua, I took maybe 15 or 16 different formulas and about maybe 40 different simples. And that's cutting it down from I'm used to an apothecary with about 350 different simples, herbs, right? And so that really cuts down what you can use. And we didn't really understand yet how to do what we call now our medical advanced party. We have a whole course for it to be able to train people how to go into an area and find out what is the local epidemiology that's going on culturally, and what are the, all the issues around that. Well, we got surprised by things we didn't expect to see at all, and ran out of certain herbs really quickly. And so I really had to be able to think on my feet and substitute in different herbs, of course, for different things, which works, of course, because herbs work on all the different body systems. You take an herb and it's not just only one body system. It works everywhere. Works at a cellular level, but you have to know kind of how to work with it. So being able to be flexible is very important with this as well.
Amazing, amazing. Um, I just love how you said, putting it in a pre-packed herbal first aid kit that people can get. And later in the podcast, we'll talk about how people can get some of your products and possibly get the first aid kits, because that's very exciting to be able to have a herbal first aid kit with formulas and various forms of application that is right there, and you can, carry it with you in a handy way. Um, just switching gears a little bit, on your social media page, you've talked a little bit about neuroregenerative herbs. This is something that is very interesting and exciting. But if you would, explain a little bit more about what you mean by neuroregenerative, and then, if you would, talk about your top three herbs, your top three favorite herbs in this particular area, their function, why do you recommend them generally, just to help to educate our audience.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting topic because there's a lot of overlap actually with many of the same herbs that are neuroregenerative with herbs that are supportive of mitochondrial function, which I've found to be very fascinating. Um, The herbs that we're talking about here are generally herbs that help repair the myelin sheath around nerve tissue, right? Not repairing nerve per se, but the myelin sheath. And that's usually where you start to see the damage to begin with chronic inflammatory processes or disease, or, with COVID, long COVID. I think that's what we're seeing is that kind of inflammatory issue right now that's going on for people in the CNS, and so causing, depression and anxiety and a lot of long COVID type symptoms. So I first started getting into this. A lot of these herbs that I use are TCM herbs, traditional Chinese medicine herbs, and Ayurvedic and Indian, not using them from an energetic standpoint. These were herbs that I was using because there was more research out on them, and I started about 12 years ago really researching it for other reasons. I work with a functional medicine MD on a very regular basis, and so she has a lot of patients that I was helping out with, and so I really wanted to find something that we could help with some of these long term. And I had a patient of my own that I saw just significant improvement in a matter of a few days, and I was just blown away by it, and so that's prompted me to continue. So I think the problem was that you, at the time, and it still is kind of this way, you had a really hard time finding good research done from any kind of an American standpoint, or American research papers that were done with anything other than a perspective of, well, at the end, we can't really tell if it works or not. A lot more research necessary. Whereas if you go to TCM herbs, or some research done in China or Asia or India, they're working with herbs that have been working empirically. They know it for thousands of years. They're not asking whether it can work or not. They're asking, how does it work? And that's a totally different perspective when you start doing research. So I was finding so much more information available that actually was useful versus just a lot of schlock that I was finding in American research papers and American herbs, unfortunately. Western herbs, I should say, I guess. You find some European, stuff that was pretty good. But anyway, there was an experiment that was done with ashwagandha many, many years ago. I think it was kind of old even at the time I read the paper, which was over a decade ago, where they were working with ashwagandha and they were applying it through what's called a nausea oil, Nasya, in Ayurveda, is an oil that you apply through the nose. So you infuse the oil with the herb, just like you're going to make a saffron oil, and you take a few drops and you rub it into the inside of the nose, to deep into the mucosa, where it then absorbs through that mucosal to the nasal mucosa. The same theory as if you're snorting cocaine. It's the same idea. Obviously, we're doing it here with an herb and for healing, not to get high, but it's the same concept. So they were using ashwagandha for, I want to say it was like early onset Alzheimer's type symptoms. And they were turning these symptoms around. Like they were finding empirically like a massive amount, a high percentage of people were starting to become less mentally, more mentally cognitive. And all these tests they were running. So that prompted me to start on this whole idea of, well, why and how and so forth. And that was the idea of the paper, was we think it's maybe myelin sheath regeneration. So then I started doing more research. So anyway, I ended up with so ashwagandha certainly could be one. Another one is my favorite is Acherantes bidentata, which is it's called oxney, is one of the American terms for it. It's a TCM herb. Really, you're going to find more. Cornus officinalis, Japanese, what do you call it? Japanese cherry or cornelian cherry, Japanese cherry, cornelian cherry, but it's Cornus officinalis. Sorry, I'm always bad with common names. I'm used to using botanical names. It seems like those three are really good, among many, many others. Polygula tenuifolia is a really interesting one because they've been doing experiments with that and comparing it side by side to microdosing of ketamine for certain psychological things that you would use ketamine for, high anxiety and PTSD, and finding it's coming out very, very well, in comparative tests. So that's another one. One of the Western herbs that probably is as well, and is famous for its neuro effects, is St. John's wort. Hypericum perfoliatum. And, these are best formulated in my opinion, but there are many herbs out there that do this. But I guess what I started off with by saying was that many of them also support mitochondrial function. So like I came up with this whole formula to do that as well, again, because of the work that I was doing with the doctor who needed mitochondrial support. And so I came up with this formula that we sell in our store called Mighty Mito, and it's basically mitochondrial function. But many of those herbs are also in the NeuroRegen formulas. The key is really how you take the herb and how you administer it. Excuse me. So if you want to get you need to get the herb to the tissue that you're trying to affect, right? That's the problem. So just taking a capsule from a store, aisle 13 in Whole Foods, is the worst way to take an herb, right? You need to have preferably some kind of liquid extract that at least has some sublingual application, or buccal. That you're getting it in your mouth as well as swallowing it through your gut. But ideally, you need to be able to get it to the tissue. And if we're talking about something like NeuroRegen, for something like long COVID, or some of these things I was mentioning with the ashwagandha and early onset, dementia or Alzheimer's, any kind of cognitive function issue or inflammation related issue, especially to getting it across the blood-brain barrier, any of the constituents we're trying to do that with, we need to get it up into that circulatory area as quickly as possible, and preferably without it having to be, filtered across the brush border and into the liver, across the portal vein and liver, and then, through first pass detoxification and so forth. It'd be better if we could get it straight into the bloodstream. And so nebulizing is a great way to do this as well. At least getting it straight across, and especially if we have a respiratory issue we're working with. not so much with neuroregen for the respiratory tract itself, but certainly to get it into the bloodstream and get it you get it available to the tissue very quickly. And then the intranasally, I think, is a really good way to do this as well. Nasal atomization is a really effective manner of this as well. So
that's a really interesting way discussion in terms of you did mention the most effective thing is to try and get it to the area that you want to impact as purely as possible, as quickly as possible. And there's a lot of capsules out there, and you did mention, liquid extracts that's better than capsules, but you also mentioned, trying to use a nebulizer type of thing or nasal rubs. I'm just curious, how would you work with a nebulizer? Are they nebulizer little caps that you can extracts that you use with a nebulizer, or how do you use a herb with a nebulizer?
that's a great question. And so what I've found to be kind of the magic dosage that seems to work the best, and through a lot of experimentation, is to use your nebulizer. Usually will have some sort of a cup that you fill with distilled or saline solution. Usually distilled water is fine. And so you put that, or filtered, even RO filter works fine in my opinion. But you fill that up to whatever that is. Usually like the minimum amounts, like 4 milliliters or 5 milliliters, somewhere in that range. And then you drop your liquid herb in. Now, I say tincture or glycerite, but really most of those herbs we're talking about, I do a multifractional extraction of. So I use water, I use alcohol, I use glycerin. Sometimes I use honey, a little bit of honey. Depending on what it is, there may be some ACV or some apple cider vinegar involved in the very first part of that extraction. I use heat oftentimes. It depends on what the herb is and what we're trying to get out. But generally speaking, there's at least one or more, or at least, two or more steps involved in extracting that herb. So when we're done, that's why I call it an extraction versus a tincture. It's not just a straight up tincture usually, but it's fine if you wanted to use that, or straight up glycerite is fine if you wanted to use it. They will nebulize. At any rate, you take that in about 10 to 15 drops of whatever your extract is. Formula. In my case, usually it's a formula, multiple extract type formula, and I will drop. I will say 15 to 20 drops in that 5 milliliter cup. Usually gives you about the max, of water, and that gives you about the max amount of, in my opinion, efficacy of the nebulizer. Yeah. Once you start getting too high, it doesn't nebulize as well. I've noticed, the actual amount of nebulization starts to decrease. So that's kind of that's the magic number I found. It's different, of course, depending on a tincture versus a glycerite to some extent, but for the most part, that's a good rule of thumb to follow.
For our audience, for those of you who are looking to, take herbal supplements, a lot of people are, of course, very familiar with herbal supplements as capsules. Some are, familiar with liquid extracts, which is even more potent and goes straight. But this whole idea of using a nebulizer with your herbs to get that directly into the cells, that's very, very interesting. Also, the idea you talked about in terms of multifractional extraction, that is very interesting, where you're not just using glycerin. You said maybe a mixture of glycerin with alcohol, with other extractants, apple cider vinegar, even some heat. That is very interesting for our audience, and how you may want to play around with all these ways of trying to really extract and build the most potent, extract to use for yourself. And that is very interesting. So thank you so much for sharing that. Very exciting. Um, Congratulations on receiving your NCCA AOM certificate. That's an acupuncture certification for those people who don't know and who are watching and listening. It would be exciting to reference a little bit about what you mean by acupuncture and the benefits of this type of practice. What does it do for the body? Where does it come from? And have you seen any real benefits and any real impacts of acupuncture? How would you personally use it or teach others to use acupuncture?
I guess I would say, I'd want to differentiate between acupuncture and what's called Oriental medicine or herbalism, the herbalism part, herbology part of it. So the very well used saying is that in America, Oriental medicine is 80% needles and 20% herbs. And in Asia, it's the reverse. It's 80% herbs and 20% needles. And this is something that is bothersome, in my opinion, because I don't think that you can. I don't think that you can. I'm probably going to upset acupuncturists out there, but I really don't think that you can be all that you can be or anywhere near it if you're not using a large amount of herbal medicine in your practice as an acupuncturist. Now, that said, there are some things that acupuncture is absolutely phenomenal at on the short term for the short term help of musculoskeletal issues, of pain relief, scalp acupuncture, ear acupuncture, for instance, issues around like pain, trigeminal neuralgia, for instance, Bell's palsy, things where you can really affect or just injuries, where we can really affect. And of course, that's no secret, right? Chiropractors and PTs know this because they borrowed it and they call it dry needling. But that's basically dry needling is like a 6-week course compared to 4 years of working with needles in acupuncture. So there's a lot more to working with acupuncture needles, but it is very similar. There's an entire school of study in acupuncture that is strictly specific to even that entire meridian, right? This the sinew, basically meridian that works with that, or just from a dry needling quote unquote perspective. I hate to use that term even really, but that's it. So lots of things that acupuncture can do that are very helpful there. It's kind of a turbo boost to certain things, but the problem is insurance doesn't pay for herbs. So if you really want to make money in and be able to accept insurance as an acupuncturist, well, guess what? You're going to have to do needles a lot. In fact, it may be most of what you do. Secondly, it's just not taught. Herbology is not taught in American schools, in my opinion, to any depth at all. And that's not, I'm not dissing or disrespecting the curriculum. There's a set, you have to learn enough to be able to pass the board exams in the right way. And there's just a set amount of time that you got, and that's it. You got to have a certain number of hours in each thing to be able to do that in the first place. So you're just limited. You just don't, I went into, I actually made a choice to go either to TCM school or back into the military as a Special Forces medic. It was my second time back in when I went in to become a Special Forces medic. Excuse me. So I made that choice, but so that's how, and I was doing Qigong, exercises when I was 13 years old. So, I've been into the concept of Qi and Taoism and Qigong and martial arts since I was a child, literally. So it's nothing. So then I was working with herbs clinically even for decades before I ever actually set foot into a TCM school. So I guess my point is that I already have a huge background in working as a clinical herbalist from a Western perspective and working with Chinese herbs from a Western perspective, not from a Chinese perspective, but from as I just mentioned, with the neuroregeneratives. So to see these herbs again, now from an energetic and a TCM perspective, was a huge new layer. I was talking about layers, of integration. One thing that was just blew me away when I first started doing my internships, and first couple of trimesters, you just observe, right? And so I was watching one of my instructors who was a Chinese, from mainland China and had been an acupuncturist for, 30 years, 40 years, huge amount of experience, and worked in China for a long time, and then came over and was teaching at the school. And I was seeing her treat patients on what I would call this kind of epidemiology we have with sort of perimenopausal syndromes, issues that we have. And I've been working with this for years from a Western perspective, where there's, weight gain that you just can't get rid of. There's blood sugar issues. There's, maybe A1C issues. There's cortisol and stress buildup, and there's cortisol issues. There's progesterone, which is a precursor of cortisol. There's issues there. The thyroid jumps in and says, I'll get involved. There's Hashimoto's thyroiditis a lot of times. All of these things that just create this huge, cacophony of symptoms and syndromes and everything. And it's like you playing whack-a-mole, you hit, well, let's work on cortisol, and then something else pops up, and let's work on that, and something else. And it's impossible. And I was watching a patient come in, and it's like, yeah, this is like, 1 out of maybe 8 or 7 patients I see are like this, right? Very, very typical. It's not unusual at all to see this. And I'm just like, let's see what she does, And she treats it like it's low hanging fruit. It's like, oh yeah. And so, pulse and tongue and doing some other, Chinese diagnosis stuff, basically syndrome differentiation. And it's just, does her treatment based on that. And she was old school and giving her herbs to take home and doing decoction stuff, which I really appreciated. Not just like, not just patent medicines. And so, yeah, like, that was the first time. And then like 2 weeks later, that same patient comes back. It's like, wow, this is the best I felt in like 5 years. And I'm actually getting a good night's sleep. And he's, and so I'm like, okay. So then I start seeing this happen over and over again. And I start realizing, oh, this paradigm of viewing the body from an energetic perspective, from a TCM energetic perspective, is 100% valid for a certain level of health there. And so I kind of see these levels. We can go at it symptomatically to begin with, and then work our way down to causal, and maybe from a functional medicine perspective, which I was doing a lot, or am doing a lot with Dr. Helm, for instance, as she's a functional medicine MD, and that helps. That's good, and that you get results for sure. But then, like, down deeper, what's going on, and as you start to get down into that TCM layer, for some of this stuff, this chronic stuff, the results are phenomenal, especially when you can integrate that with your herbal formulations. And so that's what I do now. And gosh, every case, it seems like every other, at least every other, if not every case I see, is incredibly complex. Just so much stuff and chronic issues. And just working with herbs, I'm at this point, I'm not working, of course, with needles at all, but I'm able to do, herbal consultation here in New Mexico. That's great. It's wonderful to be able to do that. And so I'm doing just that, and I'm just seeing incredible results. So
I know we're running out of time. I had a couple of questions I wanted to throw in to try and get your perspective before we actually run out of time. Um, uh, so, Mr. Kaufman, you've talked a lot about TCM. You've talked about Western, herbs, use of herbs in India, in China, in Asia, even in South America. Have you had any experience with herbs in Africa? I am originally from Africa. We grew up a lot with African herbs. And one of the things that I've seen is almost a complete lack of, African herbs in the literature. And even, what's your opinion about, have we discovered all the herbs we should be looking for? Do you think that there are many more herbs out there, especially if we haven't even started to explore herbs across, the African continent? Any thoughts on that real quick before?
oh, lots and lots. There, and not to take up too much time with it, but there are. We probably know less than 1% of what is actually medicinal on this planet. I would say less than 1%. We've probably forgotten. If you add in everything we've forgotten and has been lost and not written down, maybe you could take it up to 3%, or maybe even 5% on a really good day. Over the ages. Africa represents a huge symphony of medicine there, and many of them have come out. I mean, there are a lot of herbs that come out of Africa that have been used from a Western perspective too, that we've gone to for everything from opiate addiction to a lot of different issues that you'll see that they became kind of buzzword famous from that. But that's not even the tip of the iceberg, not even close to the tip of the iceberg of what's actually there, of course. And the same is true. I mean, you could say the same with right here in Southwest, New Mexico, in the Southwest United States. There are so many herbs that we don't know that are. And when I first moved to Texas, in the hill country in Texas, I just started using lantana on a wound. I cut myself real bad. That's like the leaf. It felt like it probably wanted to be that. So I started using it, and lo and behold, it is an incredible wound healer. Nobody knew that. Then I read years later, some study was done in India, and because in Lantana, Camara grows there too. And they're like, yeah, it's an amazing wound healer. Same thing with the root of Mexican hat herb. And, nobody uses that. You can find indigenous uses of the flower, and the leaf, but nobody used the root. And one time I just dug one up because we had a ton of it, and I nibbled the root, and next thing I knew, I was like taking a nap. And I didn't think anything about it, did it again a while later, maybe a month later, it was dried, nibbled it, and next thing I knew, I was taking a nap. I was like, oh my God, this is a soporific for sure. Started using it, and time and time again, and absolutely, it's in our sleep formulas, it's in our insomnia formulas. So there's so much out there. Yes. No, I was saying,
Opinion, when it comes to herbalism and the use of herbs in conventional, ways, there's still a couple of challenges, right? We still even have the, tell or sell. So, it's either you're telling about the herb or you're selling, but you can't do both. And then there are impermissible things that you cannot say about a herb, and that has some challenges there, right? Even if you can observe it, there's no empirical evidence and there's no clinical trials. What are your thoughts around that, and how can we navigate to make sure that we're staying compliant and not saying all the impermissible things, but also educating people about the potential and the potency of herbs to support their well-being?
Well, I think you have to just, that's where the clinical herbalism comes in for me, is I use them, and I have a lot of students. I mean, we have thousands of students over the years, but many, I don't know what the percentage would be, but probably at least 15 or 20% of our students are people who were originally clients of mine that had chronic disease of some sort and saw it turn around and said, I want to know how to do this now. So that helps, right? Unfortunately, what makes herbs popular is buzzword marketing now. And so, your pharmacy or nutraceutical companies are constantly looking for a new product to be able to sell in a new way and make it the latest, moringa leaf and whatever, it's like just grab things and throw them out there and come up with a bunch of stuff that may or may not be even true, Echinacea and golden seal, got that unfortunate kind of thing happened to them back in the 60s and 70s. And they're still to this day, it's like cure cold and flu. It's Echinacea, golden seal, which is complete garbage. I mean, they're both amazing herbs, each used in their own way. But that whole thing was just was BS. The things I use I use Echinacea for some incredible things, to include snake bites. Echinacea angustifolia root, incredible. I've seen, for dogs and humans, amazing for venom. And many, many other things beyond that. But I'm saying that, that's not something that you would ever see that advertised or people know anything about. But what is the buzzword, that people are going to buy it for? Well, for workout herbs, right? Something that's going to help me build muscle faster. What's going to help my testosterone levels? What's going to help my, or then let's find a chronic problem. Like I was talking about perimenopausal. What's going to help me lose weight, when I'm menopausal and I'm 54 years old? Well, there's not one herb that's going to do that. I got a sad story for you. That's not going to happen. So we have to slowly kind of educate on a clinical level. And unfortunately, your hands are fairly tied, not nearly as much as they used to be, but it's very difficult, you're right, to be able to get that information out, because there's a structured system that was set up, following the Flexner reports of 1910, that was set up literally to create a misinformation, disinformation campaign against anything that was not allopathic. So, that's what we're fighting against. But the pharmaceutical or the nutraceutical company, the Deshay Act in 1985, of course now the CGMP and FDA stuff going on. There's a lot of money, and it's $1 billion industry, the nutraceutical industry. So it's going to keep growing. It's not, the cat's out of the bag. At least we can say that. Back when I started, it wasn't there, and you had to always look over your shoulder because you didn't know who was going to come knocking at your door, right? I mean, it was just, you had to really worry about that.
One last question before we have to wrap up. I think we're actually over time, but I am interested in hearing a little bit about why you value living off the grid. And you've also talked about seed saving as a very important thing that you do. How do you see the world heading towards a survival society, and why are these things important for you?
Yeah, well, the question is never, if, it's always when. And that is the question. It may be after my lifetime, it may be tomorrow. But the question, if you look at mathematically, you would be 100% correct to say that we have gone through massive upheavals of war, civil war, massive disasters, sicknesses, plagues. It's amazing that we're still around as a species, in my opinion. I don't know how we made it this far, but so I think it's always good, if nothing else, to understand that, like, when you turn on the light in the house, it's not magic. That energy comes from somewhere. When you turn on the faucet, that water comes from somewhere, and it goes somewhere. You have to be, if you're an herbalist especially, you should be very connected to the fact that you're practicing a medicine of living. It's a living medicine, right? These plants are alive. They have consciousness. They have thoughts. They have feelings even. And if you don't believe me, I can show you. They do. They absolutely do. And that's part of what our medicine is. And if you're practicing herbalism and don't have the connection to the planet, then that's sad. I mean, and I don't mean like I'm not trying to be derogatory. It's just that's actually sad that you don't have that part of who you are in your medicine, because that's what this is. It's a connection to the plant world, whether you think it is or not. That it is. I promise you that. So understanding that, like off-grid type thing, I think helps get people away from, a strip mall somewhere in the middle of the city, and understand that even growing up through the cracks in the asphalt in the parking lot outside that strip mall, you got common mallow and prickly lettuce and all these medicines that are growing right there. And they're alive, and they're saying, hey, I'm here. And for some reason or another, they don't hate our species. They should, but they don't. So I think that it's really amazing to link to that.
Oh man, I love that. I love how you've concluded with that. The plant world is alive. They have a consciousness of their own. And as much as we as herbalists or people who believe in the power of herbs can tune into that and really understand the plant world and communicate with the plant world, not just from the chemical part of it, the biochemical part of it, but really connect with the consciousness of plants, and then there's a lot more power in that. And Mr. Kaufman, it's always just a huge pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for always honoring our invitation to come on the Art of Herbal Healing podcast. I have your book right here. I'm a fan of yours, so thank you for that. Just a really great book, and I wanted to show that to our audience. It's called the Herbal Medics, a Green Beret's Guide to Emergency Medical Preparedness. So we got this off of Amazon, but I would love for you to tell our audience where they can find more of your products, maybe your books and your services. Do you have a website? How do we direct our audience to connect with you?
Yes, absolutely. Of course, our store is called herbalfirstaidgear.com. So herbalfirstaidgear.com. So herbal first aid and then gear, the gear that we would use for that. So herbalfirstaidgear.com, and you can find herbal first aid packs, you can find first aid gear, and of course you find all our botanical formulas and some of our simples that we use a lot as simples. So all that's there. School, herbalmedics.academy. It's simple, herbalmedics.academy. My clinic is herbalmedics.clinic. The outreach organization is herbalmedics.org. So everything's kind of Herbal Medics. If you type in my name, Sam Coffman, Coffman, you're going to find probably all of that, except for maybe the store, but anything else will probably pop up. Herbalmedics.academy or herbalmedics.clinic.
Amazing time chatting with you again, Mr. Kaufman. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. We will have links to your various sites and services so that people can reach out and connect with you. And again, the book, I think it's absolutely phenomenal. So anybody who wants to go grab the book off of Amazon you would find a lot of great information there. Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. I appreciate you joining us on the Art of Herbal Healing, where we talk about all things plant and herbs to support our wellness journey. We really appreciate having you on the show.